Hello, this is Kyle, aka AlienTude, and it's time for another sword review. This time it's going to be Ronin Katana's medieval two-handed longsword number 10. A quick disclaimer first. I make no claims to being an expert here. I'm a novice when it comes to using swords, and I'm certainly no historian. In addition, please keep in mind that this review is my opinions about this specific sword only. So let's talk Ronin Katana. They're a budget-friendly sword company based out of Texas that seems to use blades and components made in China, probably Longsword. I say seems because some of their offerings, especially in their medieval line, are nearly identical to other companies, most notably Kawashima. Take a look at these side-by-side comparisons. I don't think there's much room to doubt that these are essentially the same swords. Now, as you might guess from their name, Ronin Katana also produces a large variety of katana, but for today, let's focus on the medieval two-handed longsword number 10. So first off, that name might be a bit of a misclassification. I wouldn't really call this a longsword. While it has the hilt of a longsword, the blade itself is single-edged and bears a much closer resemblance to a messer than a longsword. As far as I'm aware, there are no known historical swords with this blade and hilt combination. But that's not to say it didn't happen. With how often swords were re-hilted and how creative people are, I'd actually be surprised if this type of configuration never happened. So how should we classify this sword? It could be a messer without the hilt construction, it could be a two-handed falchion, or it could be a Swiss saber without the complex hilt. In the end, it doesn't really matter unless you expect your sword to be historically accurate. I would call this one historically plausible, but I could be wrong here. If you're aware of a historical find with this style of construction, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I purchased this sword from Cult of Athena for $250 late last year. It normally retails for $275 US. The blade is made from 1075 through hardened steel, and the guard and pommel are stainless steel. The grip is a wood core with a leather wrap. Let's take a look at the hilt first, starting with that grip. One of the reasons I selected this sword from Ronin Katana's medieval line is the grip. Most of their medieval swords have a grip that's bound with thick cord and a very squishy leather that I find really unpleasant. This one features a simple leather wrap that to me is much more comfortable to hold, and it feels a lot better in the hand. The leather is stitched down the middle of the back of the grip, and the stitching is prominent and pretty rough. That roughness didn't bother me when using the sword, however. No, what bothered me a lot is the transition from the grip to the pommel. Take a look here. The pommel doesn't sit perfectly centered on the grip. I think this could cause issues with balance and durability, though I'm no swordsmith, so that's speculation. The bigger problem for me is that there's no real transition between the grip and the pommel. There's just large ledges from the pommel that bite into my hand when I grip it. I've only just started my HEMA training, but my school typically keeps the hands far apart when holding the sword, and usually grips the pommel. These ledges here make it uncomfortable enough to swing that I have to choke up when using the sword. Aside from that flaw, the rest of the pommel is well-shaped, smooth, and attractive. The peen is clean and grounded down nicely, and it's much less visible in person than on camera. I do wish I'd noticed the off-center pommel when I first received the sword, as I probably would have returned it for another. The crossguard is a pretty simple one that's most similar to an Oakshot Type 10. It's a little chunky and doesn't have much dimension to it, although there is a little bit of wasting to the equivalents. The edges are chamfered enough that they don't cause any comfort issues. Looking at the gap in the guard, it's pretty obvious that the crossguard is not made specifically for this sword. There's absolutely no effort to shape the slot to the blade. It's just a mostly rectangular slot that could be used for a wide variety of swords. This isn't particularly surprising in a budget sword, but it's a little disappointing that no effort was made. Overall, I find the hilt on this sword disappointing. While I think the leather wrap of the grip is a considerable improvement over most of the Ronin Katana medieval line, the pommel being off-centered, the large ledges of the pommel, and just overall lack of fit and finish here leads to a hilt that could really use some refinement. The sword also comes with a simple leather sheath with a couple of belt loops. It's very pliable leather, so it doesn't offer any structure or stability. Without the wood core to turn it into an actual scabbard, it doesn't offer any long-term storage potential either. It's pretty much only good for travel. It also comes with a belt, but the less said about it, the better. So let's move on to the business end, the blade. Here's the measurements I took of the sword, compared to Ronin Katana's listed specifications. As you can see, the differences here are pretty minor. The spine starts at just over 5mm thick, tapering quickly in the first third of the blade. The next third of the blade tapers more gently, before again narrowing to an acute point. This blade geometry is very well done, both in concept and execution, and combined with the point of balance being at 3.5 inches, about 9 centimeters, it leads to a sword that feels very agile and nimble in the hand. The narrow and shallow fuller is grounded into the blade very nicely. The lines are straight and it terminates cleanly in pretty much the exact same spot on both sides. The blade is polished to a satin finish that's a little brighter and shinier than most satin, to me at least. It's an attractive look that's more impressive when you look down the length of the blade and see no rippling at all. That's attention to detail that you don't normally find at this price point, and honestly don't often see on swords that are considerably more expensive. The tip on the sword is acute and was well formed, but unfortunately mine has taken a tiny bit of damage. I'm not sure how it happened, but it's very small, and I'm pretty sure it could be fixed with a small amount of effort. The beveling on this sword is extremely well done, with a convex grind that travels smoothly all the way to the edge with absolutely no secondary bevel. It came factory sharpened, and it's reasonably sharp. I'm still recuperating from an elbow injury, so let's look at some old footage of me cutting with this sword. As much of a novice as I am now at cutting, I was even worse when this was recorded. With this pool noodle footage, you can probably see the sword cuts fairly well, but there is some tearing rather than nice even clean cuts. I pretty much completely attribute this to my poor edge alignment here, however. With better technique, I would have gotten much better results. When it comes to these water bottles, the story is pretty similar. I had a few decent cuts in this footage, but a lot more where the water bottle pretty much exploded, or was barely cut at all. But reviewing the video frame by frame, I can clearly see that my edge alignment is not very good here. I'd used this sword for several cutting sessions before this was recorded, and the results were better because I performed better. I'm not going to fault the sword for user error here. Alright, so let's talk bottom line. Is the sword worth the price of $275 US? Well, I think it's a hell of a fun sword to use, but on the other hand, the pommel alignment issues and the prominent ledges biting into my hand are a real problem. I don't know how common this kind of issue is for Ronin Katana's medieval sword line, but it's enough of a problem for me that I can't really recommend this sword based on my specific example. If you could be sure to get one with better fit and finish, it probably would be worth the price. All that being said, I think this sword is absolutely ripe for customization. The blade itself is a gem, let down by the mediocrity of the hilt. One thing I've seriously considered doing is buying a new crossguard and pommel, say the rice loafer fittings from Printed Armory, and having a smith re-hilt the sword with the new grip and the new furniture. I think that could turn this sword into a pretty excellent Swiss saber. You could also customize this into a nifty heron mark blade. If this kind of thing is something you're interested in, you might want to contact Wes Beam of Lonely Wolf Forge. He's customized one of these blades in this manner before, and I imagine he'd do an excellent job of it. So to wrap up, it's a fun sword that's let down by the hilt, especially on mine. It would probably be worth the price if it didn't have the flaws it did. Thank you for watching this review. I hope you found something of use in it. Please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel for more sword reviews. Until next time, Alien Toot out.